Welcome to this episode of The People Dividend. I'm your host, Mike Horne, and I am absolutely thrilled and delighted to have in our virtual studio today Alex Brueckmann. And he is the Wall Street Journal best-selling author of The Strategy Legacy, Secrets of Next-Level Entrepreneurs, and Creating the Strategy Legacy. So 3 books, all sound like great titles. And I'm going to explore those today with Alex in our episode. So it should be of interest to everyone in the listening audience, to familiar listeners, returning listeners, to new listeners, particularly those of you who are interested in people and culture and shaping strategy. Alex is a strategy facilitator for executive teams, and he's impacted companies from high growth startups in the Silicon Valley and the San Francisco Bay Area and other parts of the world. So he's gone from startups to advising Fortune 50 companies. He's also a keynote speaker, bringing actionable insights to audiences around the world, ranging from strategy and leadership to executive development. You can find out more about Alex by visiting brueckmann.ca, which is BRUECKMANN.ca, or you can reach him through alexbrueckmann.com. Alex, I am just, again, thrilled and delighted. Those are the 2 words I'm going to use to have you in our virtual studio today. Why don't you say a few words about yourself to our studio audience, please?
Thank you very much for having me, Mike, and thank you very much for the kind introduction. You said a lot about me already. I think what I can add to that is I live in beautiful British Columbia, just outside Vancouver, on the bottom of the Pacific Mountain Range. I love riding motorcycles, so that comes in very handy to live right by the back roads. And my history and my career is actually relatively, I would say interesting, because I didn't grow up in the space where I'm active now. So I've been active as a strategist.
You started in music, from what I read.
Exactly.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah.
So I started out as a music journalist, and I created and hosted radio shows, and then later realized, well, you might want to know a bit more about the world than just music, and studied business administration, which led me back into the media industry, but then on the management side of things rather than the content creator part. And that's where I found love with strategy. And so more particularly with business strategy, how to design and implement business strategy. And that's what I've been doing for the past 15 years.
And for those in our audience who are in the know, Alex, I think you studied at INSEAD and some other places as well. So what led you to strategy, though, from music to strategy? I get the math to music connection often, but how about the music to strategy? And how did you discover your passions in that regard?
I actually didn't really enjoy strategy as a subject during business school. So I never really had the goal of becoming a strategy facilitator, let alone going into strategy in the first place. So I was more into the marketing side of things, which I deeply enjoyed. And you need to know that I finished business school in 2008, and that was the beginning of the financial crisis. So it was pretty tough to find a good gig and to start a career. But I had secured a job in one of the biggest media organizations in the world, and even if it wasn't 100% like from a subject perspective, what would interest me, it was more in the supply chain management area. I really enjoyed the environment. It was competitive. It was performance oriented. And I had the opportunity to work with a leadership team that went through a process of becoming truly a functional team. And at that point, I was 30 years old. So as I said, I had this whole other career before I went to business school. So I knew about the importance of having a leadership team that is fully aligned on a few key things. And having had the opportunity to work with a leader in this context gave me a really good insight in how to connect business strategy to executive team development. And when that boss then asked me to join him as a strategy manager in a new company, well, within the same media organization, but in a new area, in a new department, I said yes. And that made me fall in love with strategy as a subject in the end, through the opportunity of working with a few big names in management consulting. I learned a lot from these companies, and I learned a lot from the individuals that I had the opportunity to work with. So that's where the whole thing started.
Yeah, I'm curious what it means to do strategy consulting. I'm engaged in a project now with a client, which we're calling a strategy project, and it's been nothing but a huge mountain of work. I think for the client and for me, in terms of creating. I think what we've done is some alignment among the executive team and some key stakeholders, and then have been unraveling a process over the last 3 months and probably for another 3 months or so on values, vision, operating procedures. But what does that mean from your perspective? I mean, what does it mean? You're an expert in this category. What does it mean to do strategic consulting or strategy consulting?
That is a very good question. And it mirrors the fact that everyone has a completely different understanding of what that actually means. The term alone, strategy, causes all kinds of ideas and all kinds of understandings. And it's kind of the S-bomb, as I call it. If you drop the name strategy in an executive room, there are maybe 8 to 10 people in that room. And every one of these people has a completely different understanding of what you're actually talking about, based on books they read about strategy, based on other books that they read that use the term strategy in a different context, or even based on experience that they had during their career being involved in one way or another in strategy processes or strategy work. And that is where terminology becomes increasingly important in the beginning of these projects, is to align on what we're actually talking about. When we use the term strategy, what is it that we mean? And what is it that we mean when we use other terms like vision, mission, and how do you bring those into a cohesive framework, into a model where they can all coexist and influence each other in a positive way? And you're absolutely right, Mike. When you start working on strategy, you typically use a strategy process to define more than just strategy, because strategy has this unique attribute that it touches a whole lot of different things in an organization. Those are the things that I call the 9 elements of organizational identity. And it starts with, what is your purpose and impact, your desired impact? What are the values that drive you, and the behavioral guidelines that stem from those values? What is the desired future of the organization that you would like to build? That's typically what we call a vision. And then, of course, what's your strategy? And that goes back to the question, what is your theory of how you will win in your chosen marketplace based on the few priorities that you have? And if you start to create terminology that everyone in the room uses consistently, then that mountain of work becomes manageable, because you can package it into smaller chunks. And, how do you eat an elephant? Bit by bit, right?
It's so interesting. I mean, having a career in executive development and organization development, I've been around the strategy topic a lot, whether as an employee in some very big consulting firms or a leader of executive development or organization development in some mega corporations. And often I worked with the strategy people, the strategy group. And my role was often engaged in facilitating that strategy offsite among the senior-most people or the uppermost people or the organization. And I often found, almost regardless of organization, particularly in these mega corporations, that I was surrounded by Harvard MBAs, people from a certain few select consulting firms, and the language was always eloquent.
Yes.
And there was often, and I do this myself. I do a lot of diagnostic work at the beginning of a strategy consultation or a strategic offsite. Is there a certain model or pattern that good strategy people follow in terms of helping to get clients to understand their system, to make sense of all of these things that are important, purpose, values?
I could obviously point to the model in my book, The Strategy Legacy, but I don't
Yeah,
want to toot my own horn here. I just want to bring that more on a general level. You mentioned
yeah.
something that is very critical in strategy work. Who are the people you operate with? And if these people are all cut from the same cloth, meaning they all are these Harvard MBAs and they are all ex McKinsey or Boston Consulting, then there are still a few people in the room that are different, that
Hmm.
are not from that cloth. And when these people use elitist language and generally speak in ways that only the informed can understand, then they're not getting the point.
Hmm.
Strategy is not complicated. It should not use complicated language. If you use complicated language to design strategy, you will struggle massively in translating that later on into language that everyone understands. And if you struggle to translate strategy into language everyone understands, then you will fail to implement it. Strategy needs the people in the business. It's not the leadership team. The leadership team might be heavily involved in designing strategy, but you need every single leader in the organization, every individual to actually put the rubber on the road. And if you start in complicated ways, you will break your neck, making up for
In
that
the
mistake later on.
in the strategy legacy, I think your most recent book, you talk about two things, at least two things. One is about future proofing an organization, and the second is about leaving your mark. Um,
Yes.
those seem very distinct to me in some ways. Are they, or
Well,
help me and our listeners understand what those are?
I started writing the book by asking myself, what is an angle that most of the leaders that I've worked with could find themselves in? And that angle is care about the future. And that manifests in two ways. It manifests in the way you lead an organization and the teams in that organization. And by doing that from a perspective of care, you are able to get your ego out of the equation. And when you do that, you help people lead better lives by starting at work. If work is more fulfilling, if you understand your contribution to the bigger picture, that gives you a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. And if you can work in an environment that gives you this, you will also leave work less stressed because you have been working on topics that are fulfilling for you, that you're interested in, that motivate you. So you leave work, you come home, you're less stressed. As a result, you're a better husband, a better parent, a better friend, because you can leave your work at work and you can focus fully on your personal life. This might sound a bit oversimplified, but if you think about it, you will realize that it's actually true. And when you, as a leader, create a work environment that helps people work and live that way, you will definitely leave a legacy beyond just, paying a salary. And when people remember you, when you've moved on to your next gig, that's what they will remember. They will remember how you created an environment that helped them thrive, both inside and outside of work. And I think this aspect of care
Please.
is super important in leadership.
Yeah, I want to explore that topic of care a little bit. I've asked lots of people to describe me, off the cuff, after in-depth analysis, and there are three words that typically surface when people are describing Mike Horne, and those are one is calm. Then I bring a sense of calm to a situation. I'm confident, and I'm competent.
Mm-hmm.
I love all of those descriptions. And there seems to be a fourth element that has emerged for me. And I attribute it a lot to one particular mentor. When sometimes I would react to things and I'd say, well, I really don't care. And she would always say to me, well, what if you did care?
Yeah.
And I've, really incorporated that into my work now about caring. And that's not often a word that I think many people would associate with strategy and leaving a mark. And can you elaborate on that, Alex, please?
Of course. If you think about what strategy is, it is your theory of how you win in your marketplace. And winning means different things to different people. To me, as an organization, winning means to be able to grow, to be able to deliver value to your customers. And that in itself has a care component. I care that I produce products that are useful. I care that my services produce something valuable. I care that I create work environments where people can thrive, learn, develop, and grow. And if I do that, it's all about care. If I don't care, I don't even bother to develop a strategy. And I think there is one sentence in the book that has been mentioned many, many times by people where I say not having a strategy is unethical. If you are a leader and you do not create a strategy for your business, that is unethical. And the reason for that is you rob the people that work with you, you rob the customers you serve of a better future. And if you think that through, companies that do not have a strategy, they will fail over time. They will just falter. People will lose their jobs. They will have to deal with angst. They will have to deal with unemployment and all the negative consequences of that. So if you call yourself a leader, then you better make sure you do care. And that means you better make sure you create a strategy and an organizational identity for your business.
Earlier, you mentioned executive development, and while I regress a little bit, it's to make a point. One of the organizations where I had one of my favorite jobs was at Marriott International, and it was during a period of the company's high growth, and it's a big organization with a couple 100,000 people, and people of all various skill levels, from people who are attending your rooms, cleaning your rooms, lifeguards at pools, to Harvard MBAs directing strategy. And in that organization, I did have the delight of facilitating the strategic planning retreats for the senior most team in the organization. And I also had the responsibility as the leader for organization development in that global behemoth for executive development. And it was back in the day when we ran residential executive development centers. We'd take people out to a beautiful location and create, an experience. And I always thought it was one of the best opportunities to link strategy to leadership. And I'm curious what you think about, given that so many of our people in our audience are people and cultural leaders. I mean, what you think about this relationship between executive development and strategy?
I think there are two components that I would stress. Every strategy project that I get involved in, I don't start to work with these people on strategy. I start to work with them on making them a functional team. If I have a ton of egos in the room, if I have people in the room that care more about being right than about exploring options, then we will not be able to create a strategy that is truly positioned to win. And the reason is the following. If people want to be right, if people want to play it safe, if people want to dominate conversations in a room and want to secure their little kingdom within a new strategy, then they are not playing to win, then they are playing to play, as Roger Martin would say. And if you have these types of mentalities in the room, you're basically just balancing a laundry list of aspirations of these individuals. You're trying to balance egos in the room. You're trying to create something that everyone can support in the end. But if you don't clear the air in the beginning, if you don't invite people to get vulnerable, if you don't invite people to say things they might not dare to say, then the result cannot be a winning strategy. They will always play it safe. So that's the first part where I think executive development is taking place, let's say, on a micro level in a room with the people that are supposed to create a new organizational identity or a strategy. And then obviously downstream, after you've created a strategy, every new strategy that is worth the paper it's written on brings change to an organization. Otherwise, it's a business continuity plan. It's not a strategy. And once you've defined how you will in the market, and that strategy is something that is truly aspirational, that means you will have to do things slightly differently than you used to. And doing things differently also starts with the executive team. People always, I don't know much about biology or anthropology, but I think one thing that have in common with the animal world is that we look up the food chain and we just observe the silverback, right? And what the silverback does, apparently that made him successful. So we imitate how leaders operate. And if leaders operate in a way that it seems that nothing has changed and nothing is supposed to change, then they cannot expect that anyone else in the organization changes. So this part of executive development plays a huge role. And then there is a very particular skill set in leading strategy and leading change through an organization. And that also needs to start with the executive team and with the leaders in the organization. In particular, I often use a document that I call organizational intent during these strategy processes. It is a document that verbalizes the entire strategy or the entire identity and draws the links between the elements and basically is written in ways that everyone can understand it. The goal is to help everyone understand where the ship is sailing and helping people then to find their place in it. That is leadership responsibility number one. If people don't know how they contribute, they end up being demotivated and they see strategy as something for the people on top and not for themselves. And strategy gets implemented by people, not by the leaders on the top. So we need to make sure that everyone understands what their part is. And that means having consistent and constant dialogues with people to help them over time change how they operate, link their roles and their responsibilities stronger to the strategy. And what it does eventually is it helps them avoid overwhelm. It helps them avoid being caught between shifting priorities. Because if they understand how their job is supposed to help implement strategy, then they can just let go of work that apparently does not support that goal. So it's the biggest productivity lever. It's the biggest lever to avoid overwhelm and burnout for people. And I have never met like a group of leaders in an organization that knew immediately how to do that. So there is an executive development part right there when it comes to taking a strategy and putting it into action.
It's so interesting. Our conversation is causing me to think, and I hope this is of interest to all of our people and culture leaders, our coaches in the audience, is to consider the role of the individual in strategy development. So, one way that I've described doing strategy development is with 15 people in a room, 12 to 15 people, senior most people, lots of data, lots of good ideas, lots of bright thinking, lots of great input. And in one other major corporation that I worked in, we took a much more decentralized approach. And, we put 1,000 people in a room using a lot of technology to get people engaged in the strategic questions in front of the organization. Certainly two very different ways in which to create a strategy. And in either case, I found both of them sort of successful. I mean, they're sort of successful experiences. So as a facilitator, as a leader, as an expert on strategy development, do you have a point of view on involvement and, who's in the room and How do you think about that, Alex?
I agree with you that there are many ways that lead us to Rome. I think where my personal preference goes is to bring the right people in the room in the beginning, a small group of people, and they are not necessarily the most senior people in the room. When you do strategy right, it is a more democratic process than it used to be, where in the past, the highest paid individuals in the organization would go on a retreat, and then they would define something that they would call strategy, and then they would go back into their businesses, into their reality. And very often the tyranny of the urgent would overpower the strategic approach. If you do strategy, I would say, well, I'm not a fan of these labels, right or wrong, but let's say if you do strategy in a better way, in a more advanced way, you don't do strategy like once a year in a retreat. You strategy becomes something that is part of your DNA. It's something that is constantly being worked on. The role of strategic foresight, for example, the role that strategic foresight plays in informing strategic choices, that's nothing that the executive team would do. That needs enough, let's say, enlightenment in an executive team so that they can share power, that they can share responsibility, that they listen to the people that do strategic foresight on a consistent basis. And when they come with probability tags attached to certain scenarios, and therefore tell the executive team what they think might be something that they should consider, then these executive teams should better listen. And if you describe the design process of strategy, which you alluded to, Mike, where do I bring which people in? I often start to work with a relatively small group of people, sometimes not even 10 people. And bringing these people into the room is not about their rank. It's about, are they able to do they have strategic acumen? Can they think strategically? And what that means is, can they let go of their current job, of their current responsibility, of their title? And can they rethink an organization? Can they think about, can they imagine themselves in the future? Can they see the organization of what it should become, what it can become? And if you create a theory of how you can achieve that future picture, then at some point you will have to involve further people. You will have to test assumptions. You will do some research. You will start to do analysis. You will start number crunching. But that is all an afterthought. Defining where you play in the future and how you will win on that playing field does not require a lot of data. It requires an understanding of how you create a theory of how you win. And then you involve a broad amount of people with various skills in testing some of these assumptions, for example. As you go along, you want to involve more and more people because, as we all know, people support a world that they help create. And if you allow more and more people to shape that future, creating buy-in and action later on in the process becomes way more easy.
It seems, Alex, that most strategy work has an objective of growth of some form or another. That it's a way of expanding markets. It's a way of offering more value in the world, depending on how the organization sees its value. But it's about growth in some format. And I think back to some successful strategy efforts that I've been involved in. The organizations were rich with resources, rich with cash, rich with people. They may not have thought that, but they were well endowed organizations. And thinking about this current strategy project that I'm involved in now, the objective is growth because it's a do or die, I think, for this institution, for this organization. But there aren't enough people. There aren't enough resources. There isn't enough capital. And the situation might be described as dire. What happens when you, enter those circumstances?
Well, let me try and answer this question by making a really strong point around resources. You can dream up a future and you can theorize how you make this a reality. But if your current reality does not provide you with the resources to do that, then you've created an ivory tower strategy that will never see the light of day. So you need to ask yourself, what is it that we can actually operate with? What is it that we have in terms of resources, in terms of people, in terms of knowledge, in terms of organizational capabilities? If you build a future that simply has no connection whatsoever to your reality, then that's not a strategy. That's a pipe dream. Mm-hmm. Your strategy needs to be grounded in reality. It needs to be, the starting point needs to be in today's world. Yes, you need to make a lot of really hard cuts and shifts potentially to get to that future. But if there is no connection, if there's just no starting point, if you forgot where you are today, then it's not a strategy. It simply cannot work.
That's such a good observation, Alex. And if you were to consider one or two other criteria that might be important to create the right environment for strategy, and I know that one of your books is the Creating the Strategy Legacy, which is a field guide. And to what extent, what are the conditions that what are a few conditions that need to exist to create these successful strategic endeavors?
So one of the things that we often start with is understanding where our unique strengths lie. And that in itself is an incredibly interesting conversation to have with organizational leaders. Because when you ask them, what are your strengths as an organization, they come up with a laundry list of things. And they all sound great. And when you then challenge them to assess that list of strength with just one criterion, which is which of those are unique to you and cannot be claimed by your competitors, then all of a sudden the lists get extremely short. And sometimes there's nothing left on that list. And that's sort of a wake-up call for a lot of leaders when they realize that there is no uniqueness in their organization, that there is nothing that makes them stand apart. And when you realize that it's not about your strategy in this moment in time. You need to understand what makes you unique. And with uniqueness comes value proposition. So unless you understand why someone would buy from you rather than from someone else, unless you're in a monopoly, the whole conversation around strategy is useless. You need to start somewhere else. You need to start by defining what you actually do and for whom. And that's what we typically call a business definition, or sometimes it's also called mission. What do you do and for whom? And if you realize that the target group that you're serving is a dying breed, if you realize that the products or services that you're offering have no differentiation whatsoever, then it's where you should start. You should start by defining what you do and for whom, not by how you win in your chosen market. So these choices that you make, they come, sometimes they are not even the first thing that we need to talk about. So the starting point for strategy work is really, really interesting. When you are an external facilitator like me, sometimes you have conversations with CEOs or executive teams where their ask is really fuzzy. What they want you to do is not clearly defined. They have a feeling. Sometimes they cannot even articulate that feeling in ways. And sometimes the word strategy doesn't even appear. So your job is actually to help them clarify what the challenges are that they need to address. And once you've done that, once you help them through a process at which end they are clearer about the changes and challenges that come their way, only then will you start to actually talk about strategy. There is, and I think we need to cut leaders some slack. Most organizational leaders have no history and no formal education or decades of experience in business strategy. They have grown a career based on their subject matter expertise. And that is very often not strategy. It's not leadership. That's not what made them successful in the first place. But now that they are CEOs or executives, the whole organization depends on them. And they expect that they are able to create strategy.
Well, your expertise in this arena, Wall Street Journal bestseller, The Strategy Legacy, another book, Creating the Strategy Legacy, the field book for that, and certainly another book, Secrets of Next Level Entrepreneurs. Just as we begin to wrap up our discussion for today, what are a few of the secrets of next level entrepreneurs? How do you think? Can you give those away?
Of course I can. It's funny because it directly ties into my previous answer. I think some of the secrets, or it's not really a secret. It's a lesson, if you want, that many CEOs or working with many CEOs has taught me is that what, in the best sense of Marshall Goldsmith, what got you here won't get you there. Once you've reached a certain level in the organization, it's not necessarily about your subject matter expertise anymore. It's how well you lead and how well you understand some of the key capabilities that a leader on that level needs to have. And one of that, for example, is, am I able to rethink the organization? Am I able to create strategy? Another one is, am I able to lead teams in ways that they can implement strategy? Do I create an environment, or some people would use the term culture, in which strategy can thrive? And am I able to use a strategy process to do more than just strategy, to actually redefine the culture, redefine how we operate as an organization? And I personally believe that one of the biggest secrets of successful leaders and entrepreneurs is that they know how to take care of themselves. This burnout epidemic that we've been seeing over the past years is a direct result of people glorifying the few ultra wealthy and ultra rich and ultra successful entrepreneurs. That's the 0.001% of entrepreneurs. They should not serve as an example of how to work. We are human beings. We have batteries. And when those batteries are empty, they're empty. We can only run on empty for so long. So taking care of ourselves, taking care of our well-being. And this ties back to the very beginning of our conversation. Self-care, care starts with yourself. Only if you are in a position to, in a healthy position, you can take care of others. You can take care of your organization.
Yeah, I so agree with that. You reminded me of Marshall Goldsmith, and Marshall endorsed my last book. And what he said on the cover endorsement is that if you read this book, it may change the way you lead in life. And I think that, is part of what we're about with this strategy development. It's not only for the organization or for the team or a subunit, a subdivision within an organization, but it's about the individual who gets involved in this, and about the opportunity for that individual to bring more of him or her or their selves to organizational life. And that, I think, is what we need more of.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Figuring out that. And it's so great to be in conversation with Alex Brueckmann and to know that he can really help everyone in our audience to think about the elements that every organization needs to master for exceptional results, to really think about how you can amplify high performance for transformation, to help you think about redefining success and what that means if you want to build an organization of any significance. And also to think about, the new normal in leadership and how strategy plays a role in that. And these are all things I think Alex is well equipped to help others with in the organization. And Alex, if I were to leave you with a last word for the podcast and for our listeners who are often involved as people and culture leaders in this work, what would your advice or guidance be?
Don't take yourself too seriously. That's my advice for life.
That's great. I really appreciate being with Alex today, and you can learn more about him at brueckmann.ca or be in touch with him. You'll find it all in the show notes and other ways to be in touch and to learn about Alex's work. So thank you very much. And until the next episode of The People Dividend, stay well.